The gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Mooney, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
In West Virginia, we have a lot of small banks. I met with some of them last year after the Silicon Valley Bank was given the systemic risk exception. Most of them were of the view that no banks in West Virginia would have been given that exception. It's my first chance to speak to folks from FDIC since then, so my questions are really directed at Mr. McKernan and Mr. Sue about the failure of Silicon Valley Bank. Silicon Valley Bank was a comparatively smaller financial institution, and many policymakers and politicians were skeptical about invoking the systemic risk exception for Silicon Valley Bank, while others, particularly those with large ties to interests in the Silicon Valley, supported making the bank's accounts holders completely whole. Would you say, isn't it true that the Silicon Valley Bank was not an obvious candidate for the invocation of the systemic risk exception? Mr. Sue?
The board, the FDIC board decided unanimously to invoke the systemic risk exception at that time based on a lot of analysis and discussion.
Brennan?
I would certainly agree, Congressman, that it was not an obvious candidate, and that was probably one of the harder decisions I've had to make in my life. And candidly, I wouldn't begrudge anyone who wanted to criticize me for it, because depending on what side of the bed I wake up on, I sometimes wonder if I made the right decision.
I appreciate that. I know we make the laws here, and you do your best to implement them, and there's a lot of gray areas in that. But let me ask a follow-up question. Isn't it also true that as a part of the analysis regarding the invocation of the systemic risk exception for Silicon Valley Bank, that an important concern relayed to the FDIC was, especially the decision was made, that it would be important to prevent money from going to Chinese interests? So, what did the FDIC do to analyze whether the FDIC would be funding Chinese interests, and how the FDIC go about preventing it, Mr. McKernan?
Congressman, I can't speak to that. I'm happy to take that question back, but that was certainly not something I was looking at the board. I was looking at the time, what was central to my decision-making is we had also signature that same weekend, and although it was not obvious to others at the time, First Republic was right there as well. I thought the three together was really what got me to yes.
Okay. Sue, any thoughts on that?
I'd have to get back to you as to your question.
All right. I've also then been alerted to the fact that the FDIC chose to insure certain foreign Eurodollar sweep accounts for a failed bank, which would be in violation of 12 CFR Section 36.8, which expressly states that the insurability of funds associated with sweep accounts maintained by foreign branches is to be determined as of the end of business status of the funds. Instead, FDIC chose to interrupt the cycle and pay out the accounts as if the money was stationary in the United States. Why did the FDIC bend the rules on that?
Congressman, that's another question I'll have to take back.
Okay. I have time for one more question. Changing back to the earlier discussion, if Mr. Gruenberg were to step down and the current vice chairman becomes the acting chairman, would the FDIC continue to function and carry out its mission? Yes or no?
Absolutely. The FDIC's functioned without a full board for quite some time.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to opine on that one? Well, let's just say the bylaws clearly state that there's a solution in place. If Mr. Gruenberg were to step down, resign today, he's already told the staff they need to prepare for him to stay through the end of the year. The staff went from hoping for a fresh start to now being stressed about the future of the agency, defeated and unable to adequately do their jobs. So that would be a good option, I would say. So, Mr. Chairman, that's really it for my questions. I yield back the balance of my time.
That'll